As Margaret lay in her hospice bed, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sadness. Her life was drawing to an end, and she was all alone. She missed her husband. But there was one person, or rather, one creature. She missed more than anyone else, her parrot Charlie. She thought she would never see him again. Until, one day, she got the surprise of a lifetime. Knowing how lonely Margaret was, the hospice staff and a bird rescue group worked together to bring Charlie to the hospital to visit her. When Margaret saw him, her face lit up with pure joy, and she immediately reached out to cuddle her soulmate close. It had been so long. Holding the parrot close and stroking his head, Margaret knew it was likely this was the last time she would see him. She fought back her tears of sadness and tried to be strong, but it was a difficult moment for both her and for Charlie. Everyone's hearts broke as they watched this sad moment. All too soon, the visit came to an end. Margaret tried to persuade the staff to let the parrot stay with her, but that wasn't possible. However, as the bird rescue worker was about to take Charlie away, the parrot did something truly remarkable that shocked and surprised everyone in the room. But what did Charlie do? Margaret was a kind and gentle soul. She had always adored animals and had a special bond with all kinds of creatures. Charlie, her African grey parrot, had been a part of her life for well over 50 years. Through all of life's ups and downs, Margaret and Charlie had been there for one another as the best of friends. Margaret had taken in the parrot when she was only 20, and Charlie was barely a year old. He had been sent to a pet shelter for being too difficult, but Margaret had raised him with love and care. Over the years, and especially after her husband died, Charlie had become more than just a pet to Margaret. He was her soulmate, a true companion, and a constant source of joy in her life. Margaret and Charlie's bond went far beyond being just owner and pet. They had been through so much together over the decades, and Charlie had always been a faithful companion to Margaret. He had been by her side through the highs and lows of life and always offered comfort and support whenever she needed it. Only a few years after her husband's death, Margaret was struck with a cruel blow. Her health began to decline, and by the time the cancer was diagnosed, it was too late for any kind of treatment. Despite this, she remained determined to hold on to her precious time with Charlie for as long as possible. They spent all of their time together, and she even brought him with her if she went outside. Ever since Margaret was diagnosed with cancer, she made it her mission never to let her parrot know how sick she was. She acted as happy as always, no matter the pain she was in. People around town knew about Margaret's situation and sympathized with her. Because of that, they tolerated the bird in stores and even restaurants. Margaret fought long and hard against cancer, but her health eventually started to decline to the point she could no longer care for herself. Her hair became brittle and thin, and moving around became harder and harder. She found herself inside more often than outside and started to feel guilty toward her parrot. She had to make a difficult decision. More days passed. Margaret's condition worsened, and she knew her time was rapidly running out. Finally, she made the difficult decision to enter hospice care even though she knew she wouldn't be able to bring Charlie with her, which broke her heart. But she knew it was best for her and her parrot. Several months later, as Margaret lay in her hospice bed, she found herself reflecting on all the experiences she and Charlie had shared over the years. She thought back to the day she had first brought him home as a scrawny, anxious young bird, and how he had grown into such a beautiful and intelligent friend. She recalled the countless hours she had spent with her parrot, chattering, laughing, and enjoying each other's company. Despite the sadness of her current situation, Margaret couldn't help but smile at the thought of all the love and joy that Charlie had brought into her life. She just wished that she could see him one more time. Sarah, the woman who was the current head of the hospice, was the first to notice Margaret's wistful smile. As she helped the elderly woman back into bed after a shower, she asked what Margaret was smiling about. She turned to Sarah and sighed. "My parrot, Charlie. I miss him dreadfully." Sarah had no clue that Margaret even owned a parrot, let alone one that clearly meant so much to her. As the nurse tucked the blankets back around Margaret, she asked her more about Charlie. She listened as Margaret told her many charming stories about the adventures she and Charlie had been on over the years. Margaret had never had children with her husband, Jack. They had met when Margaret was 20 years old, solo travelling through Greece. Jack had also been travelling solo, and the two of them had started travelling together. One day, while driving along a back road on a tandem moped, they almost ran over a gangly grey parrot. Margaret immediately told Jack to stop the moped and hurried back up the road toward the bird. The young African grey parrot, who she would come to name Charlie, was staggering in the middle of the road. He was young, hungry and dehydrated. It was clear he had been abandoned. Margaret scooped up the bird, wrapping him in her jacket for the ride to the vet. Margaret couldn't leave the bird behind, doing everything in her power to take him back home with her. Several months later, Jack joined her. Several months after that, they were married. Charlie was the ring bearer and joined in at the party with everyone else. Margaret had never imagined that this would be her life, but she couldn't have been happier. Sarah listened to the whole tale, stunned by Margaret's story. Once again, she was reminded of the many different kinds of people in the world and the fascinating lives her patients had led before coming to hospice. She would never have thought Margaret was as adventurous as she was. As the days went by, Sarah and Margaret's bond grew stronger. They sat together almost every afternoon following Margaret's daily short walk, chatting about all the adventures Margaret had gone on with her husband and Charlie. For a short while, as the fall colours started to appear, her health seemed to stabilise Dot. But this wouldn't last very long. Margaret's cancer was treatment-resistant, so she stopped her chemotherapy to enjoy her last months. However, she was in pain much of the time, and as winter approached, the pain grew worse. Her life at the hospice was very lonely when Sarah wasn't there to chat with her. All she could do was try to sleep to avoid the pain or stare out of her window at the world. Most of the time, all Margaret could do was lay in her room alone, thinking about Charlie. She remained determined to hold on to life for as long as possible, if only so she might be able to have a little more time with her beloved parrot. If she could see him just one last time, she knew she could pass peacefully into her final adventure. Finally, one day, Margaret expressed her final wish to Sarah, hoping she could say goodbye to Charlie. The head nurse reacted hesitantly at first. They, of course, had requests like this before, but it was usually for cats or dogs, and, one time, a horse. She promised Margaret that she would do everything she could to make it happen she could. After a little research, Sarah discovered that Charlie had already been handed over to a bird rescue centre. She was assured he would spend the rest of his days there, well cared for, flying freely, and being loved. However, the bird centre agreed that they would do whatever they could to reunite Charlie and Margaret one last time. Apparently, the parrot missed her just as much as she missed him. Working in tandem with the bird centre, Sarah did some detailed research about whether birds could spread dangerous diseases. She didn't want any of the other hospice members to get sick from the parrot. But as soon as she was assured it would be safe, she called the rescue centre to make arrangements. The rescue centre told Sarah they were pleased to hear the parrot could visit its owner. Charlie had been acting sad and distraught at the sudden change in his life, and they knew he needed this just as much as Margaret. They wanted the meeting to happen as soon as possible, but there was one little hiccup. There was one man who also lived at the same hospice as Margaret who was very afraid of birds. So Sarah had to arrange for him to be moved to another room, as his room was next to Margaret's. And she had to be very discreet because she didn't want to ruin the surprise. Margaret asked Sarah why her neighbour had to be moved, as Sarah expected, so she told her a little white lie. She felt terrible lying to a patient, but Sarah knew it was for her own good. Margaret believed her lie and didn't ask any more questions about it. Sarah was relieved that everything worked out. As time passed, while they arranged to bring Charlie to the hospice, Margaret's health declined rapidly. She was now unable to get out of bed on her own and needed around-the-clock care. There wasn't much time left. Sarah knew she had to hurry, otherwise Margaret's very last wish wouldn't come true. Sarah and the rescue team agreed they would bring Charlie over as soon as possible. Sadly for Margaret, the first possible option was the following week. All this waiting had made Margaret lose hope of ever seeing her parrot again. She felt very sad, but was too weak to do something about it. And then, it was finally time for Charlie to surprise his old owner. The hospice staff and the bird rescue centre worked together to bring Charlie to the hospice. He was a bit shocked by the sudden transfer and was screeching very loudly. But as soon as they entered the hospice, something changed. Charlie suddenly went silent as they carried his cage through the hospice halls. It was as if he knew Margaret was nearby. He kept looking around him as if he was searching for her. And when they reached her room, he couldn't contain his happiness anymore. He started screeching again. As Margaret lay in her bed, she could hear a lot of footsteps in the hallway. And then she heard a familiar sound. She couldn't believe her ears as she listened to the screeches of her beloved parrot. "Charlie!" Margaret said with a broken voice. A tear rolled down her cheek, and then her door opened. The moment Margaret saw him, she gasped, and her face lit up with joy. She couldn't believe they had actually brought her beloved bird to her bedside. Charlie's screeches were deafening to the staff, but they sounded like music in Margaret's ears. Finally, she has reunited with her soulmate again. She immediately reached her arms out to cuddle him close. Charlie was just as delighted as Margaret, and it even looked like he did a little happy dance. As they sat together, Margaret told Charlie all of the things she had wanted to say for the past several months. It was a beautiful moment. And Charlie, in turn, listened attentively and nuzzled close to Margaret as if he understood every word she was saying. Somehow, it looked like he seemed to sense that this was a special and meaningful moment, and everyone felt he was determined to be present and supportive of his dear friend. Holding the parrot close and stroking his head, Margaret knew it was likely this was the last time she would see him. She fought back her tears of sadness and tried to be strong, but it was a difficult moment for both her and Charlie. Everyone's hearts broke as they watched this sad moment. Margaret looked at Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered as she kissed Charlie on his head. "It wasn't just me," Sarah said. "Everyone in this room helped to fulfill your wish, and it wasn't easy." Sarah smiled at Margaret and took in all the love in the room. Charlie seemed very happy to be back in Margaret's arms. He cuddled her and did all the tricks they usually did, but there was something else. It almost seemed like Charlie could sense that his old owner wasn't doing too well. He kept his head close to Margaret's head and refused to fly around. He kept looking nervously at the people from the rescue centre, as if he knew they would take him away from her. After a few hours, Charlie had fallen asleep in Margaret's arms, and she herself was also falling asleep. So, Sarah and the rescue centre staff decided it was time for Charlie to go. They knew parting them would be very difficult, but there was no way around it. Sarah quietly told Margaret it was time. But Margaret wasn't ready to let go of her parrot yet. Tears welled up in her eyes as she thought about never seeing her parrot again. Her heavy breathing woke Charlie up, and he immediately sensed the tension in the room. Charlie began screeching very loudly as one of the rescue staff reached his arms out to grab Charlie. It was a terrible sight for everyone in the room. Margaret was crying, and Charlie was clearly not ready to leave her side yet. He flew around the room, desperately trying to dodge everyone's attempts to catch him. Finally, they decided Charlie could stay for 10 more minutes. And as everyone stopped going after Charlie, he calmed down again and landed on Margaret's shoulder. Margaret sighed and smiled as this reminded her of the good old times she had, trying to catch Charlie when he was just a little bird. Margaret knew she couldn't keep Charlie here forever, and she also knew these would be her final moments. Suddenly, she felt at peace with everything. She had seen and cuddled her beloved parrot, she was surrounded by people, and she felt loved by everyone, especially by Sarah. If this were her last memory, she would be okay with that. So, she gave the okay to the rescue staff to take away Charlie. She gave him one last kiss on his head as the staff worker reached his arms out to take him from her. But as soon as Charlie realized this was really it, he did something that no one expected. As the worker grabbed Charlie, he said something for the very first time. "I love you," Charlie said to Margaret. Margaret gasped and looked at Charlie in shock. She had waited her whole life for the parrot to say his first words. She eventually thought he would never be able to talk, but this moment changed everything. Margaret was overwhelmed with emotion and tears streamed down her face as she whispered back, "I love you too, Charlie, so much. Thank you for being such a special part of my life." The worker then slowly backed away with Charlie in his hands and put him in his cage. Sarah consoled Margaret as they watched Charlie's cage disappear through the door. Margaret was very sad that it was over, but she couldn't thank Sarah enough for making her final wish come true. She had given up hope of ever seeing her parrot again, so it truly was a big surprise for her. As Sarah got back to work, she couldn't help but feel emotional. She had never witnessed a moment like that and felt moved by the love between Margaret and her parrot. But she also felt very sad that they had to be apart in their final moments. Why couldn't the bird just stay in her room until the very end? Sarah felt compelled to do something about it. She knew Margaret's moment would come any minute, and how beautiful would it be if she could pass away with her parrot by her side? She quickly ran to the front door to see if the rescue centre was still in the parking lot, but sadly, they had already left. Sarah felt disappointed, but wanted to keep trying. So, she headed over to Margaret's room to chat about a possible second reunion. But when she arrived at the room, she was met with a shocking sight. Margaret had passed away. Sarah ran to her bedside, but knew it was too late. In the end, Margaret passed away peacefully, feeling loved and at peace, with the memory of her beloved parrot close in her heart. And Charlie, too, lived out the rest of his days in comfort and happiness, always remembering the kind woman who had cared for him for so many years. The end. Wolf suddenly breaks into hospital. Nurse bursts into tears when she realizes why. Suddenly, a wild wolf burst through the hospital's entrance, its powerful presence sending shockwaves through the corridors. The sight of the ferocious creature caused panic and confusion among the staff and patients. The nurses scattered, seeking shelter from the wolf's imposing figure. Among them was a young nurse named Emily. With wide eyes and trembling hands, she watched as the wolf prowled through the hospital, its fierce gaze piercing through the chaos. However, amidst the fear and frenzy, Emily noticed something unusual. The wolf carried something in its jaws. Everyone at the hospital is in total shock. Most of the staff run away in fear of the wolf. Emily tries calming everyone because she notices that the wolf is carrying something. It looks like a small creature, but it is not a wolf. What could it possibly be? The hospital security immediately starts evacuating the hospital. They can't risk anyone getting hurt by the wolf. Emily tries to stop them, telling them the wolf needs help. However, almost nobody seems to care. Emily decides to take matters into her own hands. This was her one chance to really make a difference. She tries to get close to the wolf, but the wolf is running around the hospital, not knowing where to go. It seems very lost and helpless, making sounds that sound like it is in distress. Emily then comes up with a plan to lock the wolf inside a room with her, but it seems very dangerous with a predator. Emily manages to lock the wolf with the small creature in a room. Then the wolf suddenly gets very aggressive and tries jumping Emily. Emily is very scared, but manages to keep a safe distance from the wolf. Luckily, the wolf doesn't want to go far from the creature it is protecting. Emily tries to make herself small to let the wolf know that she is there to help the wolf out. She knows that the wolf desperately needs the help of her or a veterinarian. Emily is in luck, and the wolf seems to calm down. Then Emily decides to seek help from a willing doctor. Emily opens the door, and the wolf stays in the room. Emily thinks it finally understands that she is going to get the wolf help. Emily quickly shouts to some doctors that she needs help with the wolf. To her frustration, they all just run away from her. They don't want to get hurt. All the doctors seem very reluctant to help Emily. She pleads with them to just follow her. They tell her that they called animal control to remove the wolf from the hospital. Emily drops to her knees. How can she convince them to help? She finally finds a close friend of hers and a good surgeon who is willing to go with her to see what is going on. He tells Emily to stay in front. He isn't a veterinarian, so he doesn't have the required skills, but he promises Emily he will everything he can do to help. When they get close to the room, they hear howling. The wolf seems to get very concerned about the well-being of the small creature. They have to act fast. However, when entering the room, the wolf is instantly on edge again. There seems to be a strong connection between the creature and the wolf. Emily tries to get closer, but the wolf instantly shows her teeth. Emily quickly realizes that this isn't going to get easy. She doesn't know what to do. When her friend Mark tries it, the wolf seems even more displeased and even starts growling at him. Mark now doesn't even dare to come closer. Emily doesn't give up, and by some miracle, the wolf only lets her get closer to the creature. Emily doesn't know what to do. She has no clue what the creature could be, but it seems very weak. She has to bring it somewhere to a safe and sterile room. Emily musters up the courage to pick up the creature, knowing that the wolf watches her every move. Luckily, when she picks it up, the wolf doesn't resist either. It finally recognizes that Emily is only there to help. However, she still doesn't let Mark come close. Emily knows she has to get to an operating room, and the wolf follows her. Emily doesn't know what to do next. Mark tells her he has no idea what he needs to do. They need to bring in an animal expert, preferably a veterinarian. However, the nearest one is still pretty far away. Mark tells her to call the veterinarian to see if he can assist from a distance. She instantly gets a hold of the veterinarian, and when she explains the situation, the vet is instantly silent. For several seconds, no response came. Emily had the feeling that something was very wrong. He asks Emily to describe the creature for her. He has absolutely no idea what it is and how to help it. But he realizes that it is getting weaker by the minute. He needs to be there in person. Emily sighs. She knows they need to wait longer for help. She grows desperate. Then the wolf starts acting up. The wolf suddenly starts howling as if it realizes something is wrong. Emily recognizes that there is something more about it. The wolf seems suddenly really on edge. Then some police officers burst into the room to check if everyone is all right. The wolf seems shocked about the number of people that are in the room. It looks like it feels threatened. Emily immediately shields the wolf from the police officers that are on edge. She tells them to back off. Then the wolf does something unexpected. The wolf walks towards the door. It looks like it wants Emily to follow her. Emily has no clue what is going on. But a sense of urgency is in the air, and Emily can't ignore the wolf. She feels like she has to follow the wolf. Deep down, Emily feels that there is way more going on than everyone realizes. She follows the wolf outside. It seems to be heading towards the forest. Emily runs back inside to grab her phone to alert the veterinarian. The vet tells Emily he is on his way towards the hospital, but can't provide further help. If there is something else in the forest, then Emily is on her own. He can't do two things at once. His priority is the weak creature. Emily has to make a choice. Emily decides with some reluctance to follow the wolf into the dense forest. She feels unsafe on her own. The wolf doesn't seem too aggressive, but Emily has the feeling she does need some backup. She only knows one person. She calls a friendly animal expert from the local animal sanctuary to tell her where she is heading. He urges her against blindly following the wolf. Emily starts hesitating. She shares her live location with David. Then she looks right in the wolf's eyes. The wolf starts to get fidgety. Emily can't wait for David to show up and decides to head into the dense forest with the wolf guiding her. Emily has no clue where she is going, but it feels like this is very important, like there is something more going on. The deeper they get into the forest, the more anxious Emily gets. She feels like she is being watched. There is one thing that comforts her. The wolf is probably defending her if something goes wrong. Then she hears something. Emily starts hearing faint noises in the distance. It first sounds like cries for help. However, it keeps getting weaker by the second. This can't be good. There are some animals that are in desperate need of attention. But what could they be? Emily is on edge and almost against when she hears a loud noise. She then realizes she is getting called by someone. She picks up the phone, but she almost has no signal. She hears the vet on the other side stuttering. It vaguely sounds like he urges her to go back. Emily knows it is an urgent call. The wolf is staring at her in desperation. Emily starts to doubt her choices. Should she go towards the noises, or should she decide to back off now? She takes a few steps back, but then she realizes it is already too late. When she starts backing off, the wolf senses her fear and starts growling. Emily then realizes she has absolutely no choice but to follow the wolf wherever it is leading her. Emily can't believe she is doing this, but there is no going back now. Emily decides to muster all of her courage to keep on following the noises. She senses she is close. It is only a matter of time before she knows the urgency of the situation. She feels a shiver down her spine when the forest starts getting more dense. Emily hears noises all around her. This time, she is certain that someone is close to her. She definitely knows she is being watched now. Then she turns pale when she hears a voice in the distance shouting at her. Due to the adrenaline, Emily doesn't recognize the voice. But when she looks up, she realizes it is David who luckily caught up to her. He tells her he lost her signal but was able to track her down thanks to the tracks of the wolf. Then the wolf suddenly gets aggressive. The wolf doesn't know who David is and starts to charge towards him. Emily realizes what is going on and throws herself in between the wolf and David. She closes her eyes, not knowing what is going to happen next. Right before impact, the wolf stops its attack. Emily sighs in relief. The wolf seems to realize David is there to help. It turns around again and hints that both Emily and David should be following now. Emily realizes they are close. David was so shocked about the sudden charge that he fell down. He slowly gets up and asks Emily what exactly is going on. Emily tells him that she has absolutely no idea about the gravity of the situation or what they are chasing. But she urges him to trust the wolf. David follows closely behind Emily when he picks up the distress noises as well. He realizes that there is something that urgently needs their attention. The sounds are getting increasingly louder with every step they take toward them. Emily asks David if he recognizes the noises. David tells her that he has never heard anything like these noises before. They both have absolutely no clue what kind of animal it could be. They know the wolf is connected. But in what way? Curiosity is at an all-time high for both Emily and David. Then they finally get to the source of the noises. They realize they come from down an old well. Something probably fell down the well. The wolf hints at the fact this is where he wants Emily and David to help. Emily looks down and calls David over. It is really dark inside of the well. They can't see anything. However, they definitely know that there is something down there. They hear it. It sounds like some animals are in distress. They need to act now. But how? By a stroke of luck, David had brought some rope with him. He tells Emily that it is strong enough to hold him so he can rappel down. He quickly starts tying the rope to a nearby tree. However, he quickly realizes the rope is too short. David tells Emily that there is only one way to do this. He needs her to hold the rope while he rappels down. Emily is hesitant. This could go very wrong. She feels like she isn't strong enough. She needs to tie the rope around her waist. This could seriously hurt her. The wolf is getting anxious because it is taking so long. Finally, Emily gives in and goes along with David's plan. She ties the rope around her waist and holds it tight. Then David realizes he has missed something. While preparing to go down, he realizes he has no flashlight and his phone just died. Emily quickly gives him her phone so he can go down. David takes a deep breath and lets himself go over the edge while Emily grabs the rope tightly. David rappels down, then Emily panics while the rope slips away from him. The rope isn't tied well enough around her waist, and she suddenly hears David scream in a loud noise. She realizes he hit the bottom. David did indeed fall, but luckily he was almost at the bottom. The wolf managed to hold the rope with its teeth. This way, Emily could secure the rope and make sure David could get back up again. David grabs the phone and activates the flashlight. Then, he finally realizes what was making the noise. David points the flashlight toward the noises and sees more of these tiny animals. He shouts to Emily what he sees. She realizes that the one in the hospital was not the only one. She shouts back to David that they need to get them out of the well. They need to do it quickly. They don't have a lot of time. David needs to bring them to the surface one at a time. The animals are weak, so he needs to support them as well as he can. David has no clue what they could be, but he has a feeling that the vet already has an answer back at the hospital. After about 15 minutes, David got all the animals to the surface. They were now staring at a total of 5 animals. There was only one problem they had to deal with now. They had to get them safely to the hospital, but the animals were too big to transport them all at once. Or so it seemed. David and Emily can only carry 2 each, which still leaves them with 1. However, they realized that the wolf could carry one of them as well. They picked up the animals and started making a run for it. They had to get back. Then Emily got called. But the vet that he had identified the animal and that it was important she return to the hospital immediately. Emily told the vet that they had found 5 more. Then she heard a gasp. "How is that even possible?" The vet shouted. Emily told David about the vet's reaction. They both got really concerned about how he reacted and fastened their pace. They know now they cannot waste any minute. The animals had to go to the vet to be saved. Were they too late already? When they arrived at the hospital, they were told to hand over the animals and wait in the waiting room of the operating room. They cannot enter the room under any circumstance. The vet needs to be fully focused to save the animals. Emily gets really anxious. They start speculating what these animals could be. They aren't wolves, but the wolf is definitely connected to them. The wolf was allowed inside of the operating room because they could not control it anymore. Then, after some hours, they heard a loud howl. The howl was coming from the operating room. The vet opened the door and let them inside. He told them they were just in time and that they had managed to save the animals. Emily sighed in relief, but she was still curious. Emily first runs to the wolf, who seems to be very calm. The animals themselves also stopped making noises and appeared to be asleep. The vet tells her that they needed to regain their strength and that it could take a while. Emily musters up the courage to hug the wolf. The wolf lets her. It realizes that Emily had all the best intentions and managed to help in this difficult situation. Then Emily turns to the vet and asks for an explanation. The vet starts off by telling Emily and David that he was wrong. He should have never asked Emily to go back. However, he was scared that something might happen. Then he tells them that he saved some extraordinary animals that he had never seen before. These animals are a crossbreed between a wild dog and a wolf. He can't tell how they ended up inside the well, but these pups are very rare. He knows that there is a black market for animals like this. She is completely against letting them back into the wild. They need to go to someplace safe. He tells them it is best for the pups and the wolf to be transferred to a safe place where they can be observed, not a zoo, but an animal sanctuary. Luckily, David works for the local animal sanctuary, and they still have room for these animals. David is concerned about the wolf and what it will do when they take her pups away. However, it seems like the wolf is happy to follow her pups to the animal sanctuary where she is taken care of. One less thing to worry about. Emily now regularly visits the wolf, and even the pups recognize her and David now. She gets a lot of love from them. She is happy that she made the choice to conquer her fears and follow the wolf into the forest that day to save the animals.